Hey guys, the Curious Owl here, and today I am going to be reviewing Salem's Lot by Stephen King. This is Stephen King's second published work. This is also his first real jump into the horror genre, because I would not consider his first published work, Carrie, to be anything really horror-filled. It definitely was suspenseful and thriller-like, but there wasn't really a whole lot of elements that I would normally associate with like horror stories, whereas Salem's Lot is a whole other bag of worms that really just showcases Stephen King's ability to write horror and write very dark and twisted things that we will see much later on in his career. Salem's Lot takes place in this little town, I believe in Maine, called Salem's Lot. The real name of it is Jerusalem's Lot, but the townspeople they'll call it Salem's Lot just to kind of make it easier for people to really say the name. It's a very small town with very few people. It's kind of more like a village of sorts, I think is the way that it's described. And the main story really follows this writer who had originally lived there when he was a young child. And in the time that he had lived there, there was this house that everyone had assumed was haunted because it had used to be in the possession of a very well-known gangster who was known to be very evil. He would essentially lure children into his home and kill them, and eventually had killed his own wife and then had committed suicide. And the house is supposedly haunted by his ghost. The writer, when he's a young child, goes in the house on a dare to see if he can find anything of value that may give credence to that rumor of the fact that the house is haunted. And unfortunately, we find out very early on in the story he did see something. He saw essentially what looked like the rotting body of the man that had been the gangster and had done all these really horrible things. Fast forward years later, this writer decides to come back to this town after several years of being away from it in order to try to find out more about that house and that man in particular, and writing a book about it. However, as he spends his time for the first time in several years in Salem's Lot, things start to go very, very dark because children actually start to go missing. So this writer believes it may have something to do with the fact that there was this rumor about the ghost of the gangster that had lived there coming back. But things turn out to be much more nefarious than he had ever believed, and when other townspeople start to go missing as well, he realizes that there is something much bigger at play in Salem's Lot than he could have ever imagined. To go much further into the story would really spoil a lot, but in terms of the structure of the story, really we see a lot in this that you will see in various other stories of Stephen King, including Carrie in a sense, where there are multiple perspectives in the story that deal with different people within the town, the writer himself, a young boy that we come to assume somehow must have gone off with the writer at some point. And it's really interesting because there also is this idea of the fact that there's kind of this perspective of after everything happens in Salem's Lot, after the main plot of the story, and essentially from there, the writer decides to go back to this town again to finish off what essentially he had started in the main plot of the story. But I can't really tell you what that is or who he's with because it does spoil quite a bit of the story. But like I said, the structure does delve into like a lot of perspectives between the different townspeople and the writer himself, and even the people that are causing this mayhem that essentially are trying to kill everybody in this town. And I thought it was actually really interesting. I really liked a lot of the elements that were at play within the story. And then when we found out exactly what was going on in this town, I was amazed and I was shocked, because what Stephen King brings up as like the real mystery behind the entire thing is something that I think in this time period when this book was first published was almost unheard of, because there weren't, to my knowledge, a lot of stories that dealt with the type of monster that Stephen King had wrote about in this novel. I don't know of very many other authors that had written on this type of monster, and I just was so shocked and amazed that he was able to pull this off without anyone really knowing exactly what it was. There were inklings to what the monster could be, but you really had no idea until about probably like 75% through the way through the book. This book was originally published in 1975, so this obviously is a very old book. It is now almost 45 years old. I believe it actually this year would be 45 years old, which is absolutely mind-boggling. And so then it comes into question, does this story still hold up to what it may have done in that time period? And I would say yes. It's still super scary, it's still really suspenseful, and it doesn't distract too much from what the real story is in terms of establishing the time period. Like, there are some things that, you know, obviously seem different than what we would see today based on some of the interactions and some of the thoughts of some of the characters in terms of other genders or children or whatever, but it's not too different from what we would see today. So it's not too far removed to even say that this story could very easily work in today's climate. This actually, I think, if it was to be, you know, written by somebody else today, it would actually do really well, I think, especially making it an adult novel, because I think that there's so many elements in it that work so well that are just very easy to transcend over time, that I think that this is one of Stephen King's books that are just going to remain timeless throughout his entire career and after his passing. Lord knows we don't want that to happen. Now, in terms of things I didn't like, because I did give this a 3-star, I feel like for me, the thing that I have a hard time with is the multiple perspectives. I felt like it wasn't really necessary in the first like 100 or so pages of the book. I feel like I just got very confused within the first 100 or so pages, but once I kind of got past that point, things actually made more sense as to why there were so many perspectives in the story, and then it made it easier for me to understand the story itself. I was mistaken. I gave Salem's Lot a 4-star, not a 3-star. For some reason I kept thinking it was a 3-star, but I think that's because his next book, The Shining, I gave a 3-star, and I'll have a whole review out of that next week. I think really in regards to the overall craft of the story, it's really well done. Like, it's a big book, don't get me wrong. This is his longest book to date, as this is his second publication, and it, I think, showcases though his talent, and I think that this just kind of shows that this is really where he may have taken off in terms of his writing and how he became so very popular, because I think that with this book we really see a lot of his ability to craft a story and craft characters and really make things atmospheric and terrifying, because not very many authors in his lifetime in this particular time period were doing this. They were not really delving into the dark parts of life and the dark elements of stories, and Stephen King, I think, at that point really set himself apart. Carrie was, I think, a really good taste of what he was capable of in terms of kind of the more supernatural, almost science fiction-y kind of things that he does go into slightly with other stories and other series that he gets involved with. But I think that Salem's Lot is a true testament to his ability to write horror and write atmospheres, because his atmospheric writing is so well done. It really places you in the story and it makes you feel terrified in the parts where you're supposed to feel terrified. And having read quite a bit of his other work, some of his more newer work, I feel like that has not really changed. I think that in particular, like Desperation was another really good testament to that atmospheric and horror-based writing that I think has grown since having written Salem's Lot. So those are my general thoughts on Salem's Lot. I don't really want to go too much into it though, because I know there are a lot of people out there that are looking to get into Stephen King, so I don't ever want to make these reviews spoilery. I just want them to give a general idea of what the story is and kind of what I think may have happened in terms of the writing, and especially the time period that Stephen King may have been writing in these stories, and kind of what each of these stories really does in terms of explaining his writing, his kind of building on his career, and I think more along the lines of do these stories actually still work in this current climate and time period that we are in, because it's very possible that there are going to be some books that don't really translate as well because they were written in a very different time period than now. And that's kind of what I want to explore more so with these reviews. So let me know your thoughts on Salem's Lot if you read it, what you thought of it. I personally really enjoyed it. I think that it was honestly, it's one of my more favorites of his. It is not my absolute favorite, but I do think that this is like in my top 10 as of yet for Stephen King in general. I think that this just really shows a lot of his talent that I think a lot of people don't really know about. So if you're looking to get into Stephen King horror, this might be a good place to start, considering this is his very first horror-based novel. Anyway, thank you guys so much for joining me in this video. If you guys did enjoy it, please do give it a big thumbs up, and if you're not already and you'd like to be, hit that button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock, and I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys!